So for companies that are looking to get into that acquisition mode and they've decided, okay, this makes sense for us, and we've done that sort of initial analysis that you were talking about, what happens next? How does the situation unfold in terms of getting in contact with folks? What do you then next need to determine?
Okay. So the first thing you want to make sure you do, kind of dovetailing off of what we just spoke about, is determine what is the strategy for the acquisition process. Is it to fill a product gap, geographic gap, technology gap, human capital gap? Figure out that first. And then you really want to map from the time, let's just use a product company, raw material, all the way through to distribution, your process, and say, where are the gaps? And what can we do from an acquisition perspective to fill those gaps? Once you determine that, then you want to set up a criteria that you're going to initially go out and screen potential targets against. And you want people involved in this all the way up and down your organization. You don't want this just sitting, at the CEO, CFO, chief sales or revenue officer, because unfortunately, a lot of times, especially mid-market companies, they're not as close to the customer as the business development, the engineers, the accountants are. They're talking to the customer every day. So you really want to get them involved because they're the ones that are doing the process. And it also helps if you get more people involved on your organization through the acquisition process, they're bought in, right? So they're not as scared. So once you come up with that criteria, a lot of times companies will just start reaching out to their network, whether it's their attorneys, their accountants, their marketing vendors, to start to say, hey, do you know anyone in this space? Not necessarily that wants to sell, but just in the space, and that's an okay, but it's a very, very narrow way of doing it if you do it yourself, for a couple of reasons. One, a company's contacts are relatively narrow to what they do. It's a full-time job to identify those companies. And you really probably don't have a lot of people that are just sitting around right now with extra time. And third, that it shows that you're signaling to the market that you're looking to buy something, which is competitive intelligence that you don't want other companies to know right now, right? Because if they know you're going out looking for something, then they're going to start, even if they weren't even thinking about it, they're going to go out and start looking for something. Back to that, I'm going to buy it before my competitor does. So that's why you do want to use a third party. And the reason for that is, one, there's no market signaling. When a third party goes out, they're doing it anonymously. They'll provide either their network, which is much vast in terms of investment banks, bankers, other C-suite individuals that may be looking, someone that just sold their company and they were going through it, to the attorneys. It's a much bigger network. And then they'll provide an anonymous one page on the acquiring company, just to say, look, this is what we're looking for. Here's the criteria. And then the third party starts building that pool of candidates that you take back to the company, and you sit down and you start evaluating them. And you end up picking, let's just say, a half a dozen to a dozen. Then that third party will start making phone calls to say, hey, we'd like to talk to you about, potential acquisition or potential partnership. And then you kind of get them under a letter of intent, an LOI. Then you go in and you just do top level due diligence. The third party goes in and does top level. If I'm someone that may want to sell, whether 100%, 50%, 40%, I'm not going to have a competitor that may want to buy me come in and look at my books and my operations and my sales, because again, that's competitive data. If I use the third party, they'll be able to put it together and package it. I'll be able to say, before I give it to the potential acquirer, yes, it's good to go, and you can provide it, and I can take control of the process from my side.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you pick the 2 or 3 companies that you really want to dig deep into, and you do full due diligence. And full due diligence is on the ground. You start with the customer. A lot of people think, oh, you start with the trial balance and the balance sheet and income statement. You push that off, because if you find out that the customer, the churn is 70%, you may find really quick, you know what, it's not something for us. But that's also between the sales side, the customer, and the operations, where you can find savings. And you don't have to disclose those potential savings to the potential acquirer or acquiring company, because those are savings you identify, so you should get the value. And you just, if it's inventory, I was at a acquisition we just closed, or I did due diligence on for a company, and we found out that the CEO's main target was do whatever the customer wants and don't worry about cost. And what we found out when we dug into the inventory, that they were writing off about $3.5 million, or it was about 18% of their inventory value on an annual basis because of scrap. Because the customer wanted something, they went and they did it as soon as possible, didn't do it efficiently, and they were writing off, $3.5, $4 million of scrap. Well, the acquiring company was like, well, this is savings day one. We've got the process in place. We know exactly how to do this. So there's things like that you dig into, and then you want to recast the target's financials in the way that you look at the financials, to do an apples to kind of apples, call it a red apple to a granny apple comparison kind of thing, to say, okay, are their margins better? Because you may find out that on acquisitions that I've done as a CFO, their margins were better than ours. And we dug into it and was like, hey, we can actually use their process, and we're going to save, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year by doing it the way they do it.
Right. Yeah.
So you really want to recast it, and then start to look at what's the value of this company. And that's where the third party comes in again, because a third party is doing this, on a regular basis. So they know what's happening in the market. Again, back to, if I'm a company that did a round last year, and my post raise was a $30 million post money valuation, well, I'm going out thinking I want 45. Well, right now the market's probably saying you're anywhere between 18 and 22. And if I'm going out thinking I'm 45, I'm never gonna understand why 22 is a good deal. Especially if the 22 is, I get to keep, part of it comes in equity of the acquiring company, and therefore I can still ride the upside.
Right. Yeah. And, I do want to get